Alright, let's talk about the Switchbacks here in our next video. The Switchbacks is a good early season site, as these south-facing rocky cliffs are typically one of the first things to melt out around Anchorage. It's known for having pretty strong punchy conditions, and the, there's a pretty strong valley wind that can set up in Eagle River Valley here. So it's definitely a experienced pilot site, but I think if you're getting comfortable flying in strong thermic conditions and making good decisions, it is something that is within the reach of quite a few pilots who aren't flying here. So I'd like to give a little tutorial. So if you're flying at Switchbacks, your day will start off here at the Mile High Trailhead. You're gonna hike up from there through the woods and then kind of along the ridge. There's a head wall here that takes you to this alternate takeoff. I've just got that listed as it's a good spot to take off if you're running a little late and you see that there are already people in the air. But if you're just hiking up and the first person there, it's usually worth it to hike over here to the main takeoff. I've never actually taken off from the alternate takeoff here, but if you're running behind and you see that it's already working for some people, you can just take off from there as well. But the reason this main takeoff is better is it's just got more bare rock down here on the hillside that heats up faster, and the thermals usually start earlier there. So before we kind of start talking about the takeoff and where to find thermals, I want to walk through some landing zones here. First landing zone is Mike's house. If you have gotten a shuttle up with other pilots, you've likely parked your car here already, but there's a windsock. It's a nice long landing strip on the road there, but it is pretty skinny widthwise. There's trees on both sides and some branches hang out into the road, so it is a long landing zone, but it is certainly not a wide one. And in the middle of the day during thermic conditions, it can be pretty bumpy coming in there, and there's always the chance that you snag a wingtip on a tree or something. So on strong days, one of my preferred landing areas is this swamp here at the end of Harmony Ranch Road. Some people land on the road here that is parallel with the valley wind. I like the swamp because although your feet will get wet, it's nice and soft, it's safe. You can land facing into the valley wind. You land going this way, since the valley wind typically sets up from west to east. There is kind of like some calf-high brush in the swamp, so typically your gear doesn't really get wet, just your feet will. And like I said before, it's nice and soft. If anything happens on your landing, there's a lot of forgiveness in that swamp there. Another place I've landed is this swamp over here. I think I was coming back from Arctic Valley at that point and wasn't going to make it to Mike's or the other swamp, so I landed here. It's a bit wetter than that other swamp. My gear did get wet on that one, I think, but it's worth noting if you land here that you should hike out to the east to this road here. I think it was Mike who told me that this guy who owns this property at the end of that road is friendly to pilots, but it would be not wise to try and take a shortcut and walk through these guys' yard. It might upset them, so we want to be respectful of those property owners. Alright, let's talk about the launch up here at Switchbacks. So, one of the reasons that this takeoff works so well is, like I said before, there's a lot of bare rock here. It's pretty craggy, it heats up in the sun. There's a bit of a bump right here where thermals often trigger off of. That's why I've got the red tornado mark for thermals. A lot of what we're looking for in the Eagle River Valley early in the day is these southeast faces that are heating up, and the thermals flow up those faces. If there's a west wind or the valley wind has started to set up, sometimes things will be pushed up the west face as well. So we just get this nice little lift convergence over this main spine that is heading down into the valley. Oh, one thing I forgot to say earlier, right at the beginning of the video, you're typically looking for pretty calm winds if you're flying the Switchbacks. It can be rotary and spicy, anything besides calm winds or light south winds. South winds generally are preferred if it's not light, but also you can fly in some light north winds as well. Typically there'll be enough of a thermal block on these south-facing slopes that a light north wind can work as well, but expect bumpier conditions if there's a north wind, because those aren't going to be lee side thermals. Like I mentioned before, since these southeast faces are also the ones heating up first, and if there's a west wind, those will also be lee side thermals. I think that is a big factor in what makes the Switchbacks kind of a heads up bumpy place to fly. is a lot of these thermals, at least early in the morning, are forming in lee areas, and that just means that they're pretty punchy. They've got small cores, and it's often pretty strong. So you take off. Kind of my first few moves are trying to find some lift in this area here. It's steep, rocky face. There's a lot of good spots for thermals to release. If I don't find anything there, I might head around the bowl to this trigger over here. It's another rocky ridge running down the valley. Those are where I'm kind of looking for lift first. If I'm having trouble getting above launch and I can't really find anything over here by launch, sometimes I kind of just start to head back the valley and see what I can find. So I might fool around here if I don't find anything. Often if you cruise across the bowl, these cliffs on Mount Magnificent here are some nice dark rock. You might find some lift there. I've climbed out in thermals right in front of Mount Magnificent there before. It can be a good spot to find lift. If I don't find anything real there, the first spine back from Mount Magnificent is often a pretty good place to find your first climb. So let me zoom in here and spin the camera around. When you're flying back the Eagle River Valley, especially early in the year, most of the lift that you're going to be finding is kind of out here away from the ridge tops. It's hard to see on this one, but this spine kind of rolls over a bit right here, and there's a bit of a bench. So thermals will often build in the neighborhoods and in the trees down here, and then if it's snow covered up high, they're not going to roll past this first roll over here. A lot of the times they trigger out in the valley almost, and you'll be finding climbs here on the shoulders of the mountains versus up here in the mountains themselves. So this first spine here is a good spot to climb out or find your first climb. You can notice that it's got a nice big east face. So lift thermals might be feeding up this east face. It's hopefully been in the morning sun all morning already, so that's a good spot to find your first thermal. Moving back the valley, there's another spine here. It's got a pretty sizable east face as well, so that can be a good spot to find a climb. Like I said, if I'm on my way back Eagle River Valley, I'm typically out here over these shoulders versus trying to stay to a line that's back closer to the ridge. That I find oftentimes you just don't ever really climb that high on the way back in the morning. I can show you a picture here too that kind of shows what I'm talking about. So this picture here was a light north wind day, and it's early in the season. You can see everything's covered in snow, but what I think is going on is the thermals are building down here in the trees and the woods, and then they're rolling up, triggering right about here. And then once they get into the north wind, you kind of see that things are feeding into those clouds back over the valley. So we're flying back. We've maybe found a climb at the first spine here. You've been able to climb up a bit. You're gliding along. Find a little something at the second spine. Climb up a little bit. We're just going to keep going back the valley. I wish I didn't move with me, but this third spine can be a really good spot to find lift on your way back earlier in the day. As you can see, there's a gigantic east face here on the third spine. That'll have produced some good heat in the morning. If you can fly over that, basically over this thermal marker, there's often a pretty good climb there. And by this time, if you're low, like down in here, you're going to want to be looking for somewhere to land. You're probably not going to make it very far at that point. So if that were the case, you've got the RC park right here. It's a bailout LZ. It's not a preferred landing area, as it is an RC park, so people do fly RC planes there. That being said, I've never actually seen anyone flying an RC plane there. I've used it a couple times, but just be aware that there could be other little planes in the air that are going to be pretty tough to see. And I think there have been a couple of angry words said in the past at pilots landing there. But so we're back here over this third spine by now, hopefully. If I found a climb there, I'm just gliding. I'm trying to make it to this marker right here. This fourth spine, it doesn't have a whole lot of east-facing terrain on it, so typically in the morning I will pass it by, and I'm not even going to waste time trying to find a climb there in the morning. So Hopefully you've gotten to about 4,000 or 4,500 feet over this third spine, and you can make the glide all the way to either this thermal trigger, which just has this big east face right beneath it to heat up, or to the Dragon's Back Ridge. Dragon's Back Ridge is a nice bunch of little fingers that thermal's going to climb up and they'll release off this sharp ridge here. So that's typically an area of reliable lift. If you've made it this far back the valley, you're going to want to go and tag the west face of Cumulus Peak. That's a great spot to find lift because, as you can see, as the valley wind sets up and funnels back Eagle River, the west face of Cumulus Peak is facing into that valley wind. So what you're going to get is thermals and wind pushing back the valley, and then they all kind of funnel up this face. It's a bridge into the valley wind, so that's a great spot to either hang out and ridge soar and wait for something else to come along, or maybe you'll find the thermal right away and you can climb out. So that's the way back, or at least a few pieces of advice that I've got on the way back Eagle River. Next, you're going to be flying out, hopefully. You can always land in the swamp here. It's not the greatest LZ, it's definitely wet, but there's room to land back here. But typically you're going to want to try to fly back out of the valley here as well. So getting out is generally a little trickier than getting in Eagle River. The valley wind is going to be a headwind if you're low, so you typically want to try to stay pretty high. I try to get as high as I can on the west face of Cumulus Peak or above Dragon's Back Ridge here before taking off, trying to make it back out of the valley. Later in the season, once the snow is melted, it's generally a good plan to try to stay high and work your way back over the ridge here and stay like at the ridge crests. If you're at ridge height and finding stuff above the ridges there, you're going to be out of the valley wind, so you're going to have a lot easier time getting out. If you do find yourself low and not able to climb high, you can still push into the valley wind, leaving Dragon's Back Ridge area here. A couple of times I've been able to fly and you just use the terrain to get back out. So if you can get here, you can kind of ridge soar up these bowls, and if you get high enough there, you would leave. And this is really kind of the crux of getting out here, is getting around this spine. And if you do that, then you can once again ridge soar up that bowl. I'm going to turn the camera here a little bit to see better, but if you can get to here at that point in the day, you'll probably be looking more at like south faces that are heating up to west faces. So this fourth spine on the way out is often a really good spot to be patient and try and find a good climb. If you get to here and you don't find anything, it's a little harder to soar this face up because it's not facing into the valley wind as much, but it is possible. A lot of the times you might be here and just kind of working a thermal up this ridge. And really, especially later in the season, what you want is to get back up to this ridge crest and be flying along the ridge. You don't want to really be flying this line out here because that's where you're going to be exposed to all that valley wind if you're low, and it gets really hard to fight that headwind. Some days the lift is going to be out here, especially early in the year, but you do want to be high when you're flying this line out over the valley. When you get low, it's really hard to punch into that valley wind. So like I said, you kind of work your way out. You can stop in these bowls and try and ridge soar up. Same with the second spine here, that's a good one. If you can come in, even if you come in low, you can often ridge soar the valley wind back up the bowl until you find something that maybe is releasing off these ridges. If you're in a thermal, then you're good to go and you can keep on going. Same with the first spine here. If you're low and you get around it, this bowl, it's worked for me more than a few times. You can kind of soar it up. And then once you get on the ridge, you might find something that's another thermal that's climbing up the ridge. You can get above Mount Magnificent and then take off to Baldy or go land down in the valley or whatever. But yeah, so that's kind of my synopsis for a flight from the Switchbacks. In the morning, you're looking for southeast faces that are heating up. That's where you're looking for heat sources and where thermals might trigger above those. Once you're coming out of the valley, you want to stay as high as you can to stay out of the valley wind. And those southeast faces are important. You might be looking more for south faces and southwest faces that are heating up. It's a bumpy place to fly sometimes, especially in a north wind, especially in the morning too, when it's those east faces that are heating up, but maybe the predominant wind direction is west. It's all going to be little lee side thermals, so that's one part of what makes it so punchy. But yeah, that's the Switchbacks.